Hello and welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. Just a moment, as you know, I have to go right over here to the other technology and share that I am live. So let me see if it'll even allow me to do that. It says I am live. Here we go. Share, copy link. We'll go right over here to the Facebook, as the kids say. Newsfeed. No, we'll go search for the Gentleman Psychic. And we will create a new post. Join me live. Hi. Hello, Mary Jane. Hello, Anessa. Join me for story time. Story time. Live. Publish that one. And now I go over to my regular Facebook and I go here. Now there is a Ustream. I really should connect really should do that. Join me live for story time. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. So before I begin, I'm going to clear that off there. Let me see here. And I'll bring up my... Okay. Before I continue, I would like to just take a moment and say thank you and welcome, everybody. Hi, Dee. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Amy, Anissa, Raven. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. So, as you know, we are reading our way through the sorrows of Satan, but I wanted to take a little moment to appreciate my very good friend. I have a lot of really good friends, and I'm really lucky, but there's one right now that I would like to talk about for just a moment. My friend from Pasadena, John Thompson. You can see him. Lauren Morgan Richards reminded me that you can see him on my channel. We were discussing some very heavy things, but I found out that he passed away rather suddenly. And I am so grateful that I had such a good friend. He was always there to have my best interest at heart. He would defend me when people would not allow, or they would not be kind. And I owe him a huge debt of gratitude because my little roadster, Mr. Satan, he is the one that got it running and kept it running the entire time that I had Mr. Satan in California. And he was a really good friend, and I'm going to really miss him. I will tell you one more little story about my friend. Back in Pasadena, on occasion, he would come. He was my neighbor, and he would come in and he would sit in my big chair that I had across the way, and he would drink tea and we would listen to jazz, and then it would be story time. So it was one of the things that he loved to do. And really, I truly, he is a great friend. So I am creating a painting, not the one that I'm completing right now, but I am, for those of you who are in the know, I am painting my way through the tarot deck. My idea is to create all 72 cards, to have my own tarot, and I hope then to make them for sale. However, thanks to my very good friend Lauren Morgan Richards, who gave me the idea that I should, as a tribute to my friend Johnny, I should paint the Chariot. And that's what is going to happen, because my friend he was keen about old cars, and he loved my car. He'd call me and he'd say, "How's my car? Yeah, how are you? You're right. Okay, how's my car?" So I'm going to do the Chariot, and when that one comes up, all monies that are made from the sale of this painting are going to go to his family to sort of alleviate some of the pressure from this unexpected loss. And that's what's going to happen. So look for that within the next week or so. There should be a lovely new painting. We're going to try to. The idea is to get as much money as we can for their family, because it's a massive loss that they have endured, and I love them. So look for that within the next week or so. And with that, my beauties, that was all of the announcements. And I feel like that we should just go ahead and delve right into the sorrows of Satan. Last week, we had quite an exciting discovery. The Lady Sybil has been found in her chambers, deceased, but she went at her own discretion. She went on her own. So, with that, my loves, we are on chapter 35. Thus ran the last document, commencing abruptly, without prefix. I have made up my mind. 1 second, I think here goes the clock. I don't want to be interrupted. I forgot it's a few minutes behind, so maybe not. I heard it click. It's going to go. All right, well, here we go. So Sybil is now dead. She poisoned herself. She's watching herself in the mirror, and she had an evil smirk on her face. And our hero, Geoffrey Tempest, decided he's going to read the letters that she had left. So it's going to go off. It'll ring 10 times, but we'll just push through it. Chapter 35. Thus ran the last document, commencing abruptly and without prefix. I have made up my mind to die, not out of passion or petulance, but from deliberate choice, and as I think necessity. My brain is tired of problems, my body is tired of life. It is best I make an end. The idea of death, which means annihilation, is very sweet to me. This unease is very sweet to me. I am glad to feel that, by my own will and act, I can silence this uneasy throbbing of my heart, this turmoil and heat of my blood, this tortured aching of my nerves. Young as I am, I have no delight now in existence. I see nothing but my love's luminous eyes, his godlike features, his enthralling smile, and these are lost to me. For a brief while he has been my world, life, and time. He has gone. And without him there is no universe. How could I endure the slow, wretched passing of hours, days, weeks, months, and years alone? Though it is better to be alone than in the dull companionship of the self-satisfied, complacent, and arrogant fool who is my husband. He has left me forever. So he says in a letter the maid brought to me an hour ago. It is quite what I expected of him. What man of his type could find pardon for a blow to his own amour propre? If he had studied my nature, entered into my emotions, or striven in the least to guide and sustain me, if he had shown any sign of great, true love, such as one sometimes dreams of and seldom finds, if he had shown me any sign of great love, true love, such as one sometimes dreams of and seldom finds, I think I should be sorry for him now. I should even ask his forgiveness for having married him. but he has treated me precisely as he might treat a paid mistress. That is, he has fed me, clothed me, and provided me with money and jewels in return for making me the toy of his passions. But he has not given me one touch of sympathy, one proof of self-denial or humane forbearance. Therefore, I owe him nothing. And now he, and my love, who will not be my lover, have gone away together. I am free to do as I will with this small pulse within me called life, which is, after all, only a thread easily broken. There is no one to say to me nay, or to hold my hand back from giving myself the final quietus. It is well I have no friends. It is good for me that I have probed the hypocrisy of social sham of the world, and that I have mastered the following hard truths of life: that there is no love without lust, no friendship without self-interest, no religion without avarice, and no so-called virtue without accompanying stronger vice. Who, knowing these things, would care to take part in them? On the verge of the grave, I look back along the short vista of my years, and I see myself a child in this very place, this wooded Willowsmere. I can note how that life began to which I am about to put an end, pampered, petted, and spoiled, told that I must look pretty and take pleasure in my clothes. I was even at the age of 10 capable of certain amount of coquetry. Old Rose, smelling of wine and tobacco, were eager to take me on their knees and pinch my soft flesh. They would press my innocent lips with their withered ones, withered and contaminated by the kisses of coquettes and soiled doves of the town. I have often wondered how it is these men can dare to touch a young child's mouth, knowing in themselves what beasts they are. I see my nurse, a trained liar and time-server, giving herself more airs than a queen, and forbidding me to speak to this child or to that child because they were beneath me. Then came my governess, full of Puritan prudery, as a bad woman in morals as ever lived, yet highly recommended, and with excellent references, and wearing an assumption of the strictest virtue, like many equally loose clergymen's wives I have known. I soon found her out, for even as a child I was painfully observant, and the stories she and my mother's French maid used to tell in lowered voices now and then, broken by coarse laughter, were sufficient to enlighten me as to her true character. Yet beyond having a supreme contempt for the woman who practiced religious austerity outwardly and was at the heart a rake, I gave small consideration to the difficult problem such as nature suggested. I lived. How strange it seems that I should be writing now of myself as past and done with. Yes, I lived in a dreamy, more or less idyllic state of mind, thinking without being conscious of thought, full of fancies concerning the flowers, trees, and birds, wishing for things of which I knew nothing, imagining myself a queen at times, and again a peasant. I was an omnivorous reader, and I was specially fond of poetry. I used to pore over mystic verse of Shelley and judged him as sort of a demigod, and never, even when I knew all about his life, could I realize him as a man with a thin, shrieking falsetto voice and loose notions concerning women. But I am quite sure it was good for his fame that he was drowned in early youth without so many melancholy and romantic surroundings. It saved him, I consider, from a possibly vicious and repulsive old age. I adored Keats till I knew he had wasted his passion on a Fanny Brawne, and then the glamour of him vanished. I can offer no reason for this, I merely set down the fact. I made a hero of Lord Byron. In fact, he has always formed for me the only heroical type of poet, strong in himself and pitiless in his love for women. He treated them for the most part as they merited, considering the singular and unworthy specimens of the sex it was his misfortune to encounter. I used to wonder, when reading these men's amorous lines, whether love would ever come my way. and what beatific state of emotion I should then enjoy. Then came the rough awakening from all of my dreams. Childhood melted into womanhood, and at 16 I was taken up to town with my parents to know something of the ways and manners of society, before finally coming out. Oh, those ways and manners! I learnt them to perfection. Astonished at first, then bewildered, and allowed no time to form any judgment on what I saw, I was hurried through a general vague impression of things, such as I had never imagined or dreamed of, while I was yet lost in wonderment, and kept constantly in companionship with young girls of my own rank and age, who nevertheless seemed much more advanced in knowledge of the world than I. My father suddenly informed me that Willowsmere was lost to us, that he could not afford to keep it up, and that we should return there no more. Ah, tears I shed. What a fury of grief consumed me! I did not then comprehend the difficult entanglements of either wealth or poverty. All I could realize was that the doors of my dear old home were closed upon me forever. After that, I think I grew cold and hard in disposition. I had never loved my mother very dearly. In fact, I had seen very little of her, as she was always away visiting, if not entertaining visitors, and she seldom had me with her, so that when she was suddenly struck down by the first shock of paralysis, it affected me but little. She had her doctors and nurses, I had my governess still with me, and my mother's sister, Aunt Charlotte, came to keep house for us. So I began to analyze society for myself, without giving any expression of my opinions on what I observed. I was not yet out, but I went everywhere where girls of my age were invited, and perceived things without showing that I had any faculty of perception. I cultivated a passionless and cold exterior, a listless, uninterested, and frigid demeanor, for I discovered that this was accepted by many people as dullness or stupidity, and that by assuming such character, certain otherwise crafty persons would talk more readily before me, and betray themselves and their vices unawares. Thus my social education began in grim earnest. Women of title and renown would ask me to their quiet teas because I was what they were pleased to call a harmless girl, rather pretty but dull, and allow me to assist them in entertaining the lovers who called upon them while their husbands were out. I remember on one occasion a great lady, famous for two things, her diamonds and her intimacy with the Queen, kissed her cavalier servant, a noted sporting earl, with a considerable abandon in my presence. He muttered something about me, I heard it, but his amorous mistress merely answered in a whisper, "Oh, it's only Sybil. Sybil Elton, she understands nothing." Afterwards, however, when he had gone, she turned to me with a grin and remarked, "You saw me kiss Bertie, didn't you? I often do. He's quite like my brother." I made no reply. I only smiled vaguely. And the next day she sent me a valuable diamond ring, which I at once returned to her with a prim little note stating that I was much obliged, but that my father considered me too young as yet to wear diamonds. Why do I think of these trifles now, I wonder? Now, when I am about to take my leave of life and all of its lies? There's a little bird singing outside my bedroom window. Hmm. Such a pretty creature. I suppose it's happy? It should be, as it is not human. The tears are in my heart and my eyes as I listen to its sweet warbling, and think that it will be living and singing still today at sunset when I am dead. The last sentence was a mere sentiment, for I am not sorry to die. If I felt the least regret about it, I should not carry out my intention. I must resume my narrative, for it is an analysis I am trying to make of myself to find out if I can whether there are no excuses to be found for my particular disposition, whether it is not, after all, the education and training I have had that have made me what I am, or whether indeed I was born evil from the first. The circumstances that surrounded me did not, at any rate, tend to soften or improve my character. I had just passed my 17th birthday when one morning my father called me into his library and told me the true position of his affairs. I learned that he was crippled on all sides with debt, that he lived on advances made to him by Jews usurers, and that these advances were trusted to him solely on the speculation that I, his only daughter, would make a sufficiently rich marriage to enable him to repay all loans with heavy interest. He went on to say that he hoped I would act sensibly, and that when any man showed indications of becoming suitors for my hand, I would, before encouraging them, inform him, in order that he might make strict inquiries as to their actual extent of fortune. I then understood for the first time that I was for sale. I listened in silence till he had finished. Then I asked him, "Love, I suppose, is not to be considered in the matter." He laughed and assured me it was much easier to love a rich man than a poor one. As I would find out after a little experience, he added with some hesitation that to help make both ends meet, as the expenses of town life were considerable, he had arranged to take a young American lady under his charge, a Miss Diana Chesney, who wished to be introduced to English society, and who would pay 2,000 guineas a year to him for that privilege, and for Aunt Charlotte's services as chaperone. I do not remember now what I said to him when I heard this. I know that my long suppressed feelings broke out in the storm of fury, and that for the moment he was completely taken aback by the force of my indignation. An American boarder in our house? It seemed to me as outrageous and undignified as the conduct of a woman I once knew who, favoured by the Queen's patronage with free apartments in Kensington Palace, took from time to time on the sly an American or a colonial paying guest, who adopted forthwith the address of Her Majesty's birthplace as her own, thus lowering the whole prestige of that historic habitation. My wrath, however, was useless. The bargain was arranged. My father, regardless of his proud lineage and social dignity of his position, had degraded himself, in my opinion, to the level of a sort of superior lodging house keeper, and from that time I lost all my former respect for him. Of course, it can be argued that I was wrong, that I ought to have honored him for turning his name to monetary account by loaning it out as a protective shield and panoply for an American woman without anything but the dollars of a vulgar railway king to back her up in society. But I could not see it in that light. I retreated into myself more than ever, and became more than pleasantly known for my coldness, reserve, and hauteur. Miss Chesney came, and strove hard to be my friend, but she soon found that impossible. She is a good-hearted creature, I believe, but she is badly bred and badly trained, as all her compatriots are, more or less, despite their smattering of a European education. I disliked her from the first, and have spared no pains to show it. Yet I know she will be Countess of Elton as soon as it is decently possible. Say, after a year's ceremonious mourning for my mother has expired, and perhaps 3 months' hypocritical wearing of black for me, my father believes himself to be still young and passably good-looking, and he is quite incapable of resisting the fortune she will bring him. When she took up her fixed abode in our house, and Aunt Charlotte became her paid chaperone, I seldom went out to any social gatherings, for I could not endure the idea of being seen in her companionship. I kept in my own room a great deal, and thus secluded, read many books. All the fashionable fiction of the day passed through my hands, much to my gradual enlightenment, if not to my edification. One day, a day that is stamped on my memory as a kind of turning point in my life, I read a novel by a woman which I did not at first entirely understand. But on going over some of its passages a second time, all at once its horrible lasciviousness flashed upon me and filled me with a great genuine disgust that I flung it on the ground in a fit of loathing and contempt. Yet I had seen it praised in all the leading journals of the days. Its obscenities were hinted as daring, Its vulgarities were quoted as brilliant wit. In fact, so many laudatory columns were written about it in the press that I resolved to read it again. Encouraged by the literary censors of the time, I did so, and little by little, the insidious abomination of it filtered into my mind and stayed there. I began to think about it, and by found pleasure in thinking about it. I sent for other books by the same tainted hand, and my appetite for that kind of purulent romance grew keener. At this particular juncture, as chance or fate would have it, an acquaintance of mine, the daughter of a marchioness, a girl with large black eyes and those full protruding lips which remind one unconsciously of a swine's snout, brought me 2 or 3 odd volumes of the poems of Swinburne, always devoted to poetry, and considering it to be the highest of the arts, and up to that period, having been ignorant of this writer's work, I turned over the books with eagerness, expecting to enjoy the usual sublime emotions which it is the privilege and glory of the poet to inspire in mortals less divinely endowed than themselves, and who turn to him for help to climb beyond the highest peaks of time. Now, I should like, if I could do so, to explain clearly the effect of this satyr songster upon my mind, for I believe there are many women to whom his works have been deadlier than the deadliest poison, and far more soul-corrupting than any book of Zola's or the most pernicious of modern French writers. At first I read the poems quickly, with a certain pleasure in the mere swing and jangle of rhythm, and without paying much attention to the subject matter or the verse. But presently, as though a lurid blaze of lightning had stripped a fair tree of its adorning leaves, my senses suddenly perceived the cruelty and fiendish sensuality concealed under the ornate language and persuasive rhymes, and for a moment I paused in my reading and closed my eyes, shuddering, sick at heart. Was human nature as base and abandoned as this man declared it to be? Was there no God but lust? Were men and women lower and more depraved in their passions and appetites than the very beasts? I mused and dreamed. I pored over the Lauvenry, Faustian, and Ancontoria, till I felt myself being dragged down to the brute level of the mind that conceived such outrages as to decency. I drank in Swinburne's own fiendish contempt of God, and I read over and over again his verses before a crucifix till I knew them by heart, till they rang in my brain as persistently as any nursery jingle, and drove my thoughts into as haughty a scorn of Christ and his teachings as to any unbelieving Jew. It is nothing to me now. Now, when without hope or faith or love, I am about to take the final plunge into eternal darkness and silence. But for the sake of those who have the comfort of a religion, I ask why, in so-called Christian country, is such a hideous blasphemy as before a crucifix allowed to circulate among the people without so much as one reproof from those who elect themselves judges of literature? I have seen many noble writers condemned unheard. Many have been accused of blasphemy, whose works tend quite the other way. But these lines are permitted to work their cruel mischief unchecked, and the writer of them is glorified as though he were a benefactor to mankind instead of a corrupter. I quote them here from bitter memory, that I may not be deemed as exaggerating their nature. So when our souls look back to see thee, they sicken, sing against thy side, too foul to speak or to it see, the laborious likeness of a bride, whose kissing lips through his lips grown leave their God rotten to the bone. When we would see the man and know what heart thou hadst towards man indeed. Lo, thy blood-blackened altars, lo, the lips of priests that pray and feed, while their own hell's worms curl and licks the poison of the crucifix. Thou badst the children come to thee. What children now but curses come? What manhood in that God can be, who sees their worship and is dumb? No soul that lived, loved, wrought, and died is their carrion crucified. Nay, if their God and thou be one, if thou and this thing be the same, thou shouldst not look upon the sun. The sun grows haggard at thy name. Come down, be done with, cease, give o'er, hide thyself, strive not, be no more. From the time of reading this, I used to think of Christ as a carrion crucified, if I ever thought at all. I found out that no one had ever reproached Mr. Swinburne for his term, that it did not interfere with his chances for the laureateship, and that not even a priest of the church had been bold-spoken or zealous enough in his master's cause to publicly resent the shameless outrage. So I concluded that Swinburne must be right in his opinions, and I followed the lazy and unthinking course of social movement, spending my days with such literature as stored my brain with a complete knowledge of things evil and pernicious. Whatever soul I had in me was killed. The freshness of my mind was gone. Swinburne, among others, had helped me to live mentally, if not physically, through such a phase of vice as had poisoned my thoughts forever. I understand there is some vague law in existence about placing an interdiction on certain books considered injurious to public morals. If there is such a rule, it has been curiously lax concerning the author of Ancantoria, who, by virtue of being a poet, passes unquestioned into many a home, carrying pollution into minds that were once cleanly and simple. As for me, after I studied this verse, to my heart's content, nothing remained sacred. I judged men as beasts and women as a little better. I had no belief in honor, virtue, or truth, and I was absolutely indifferent to all things save one, and that was my resolve to have my own way as far as love was concerned. I might be forced to marry without love for purely money considerations, but all the same, love I would have, or what I called love. Not an ideal passion by any means, but precisely what Mr. Swinburne and a few of the most praised novelists of the day had taught me to consider as love. I began to wonder when and how I should meet my lover. Such thoughts as I had at this time indeed would have made moralists stare and uplift their hands in horror, but to the exterior world I was the very pink and passion of maidenly decorum, reserve, and pride. Men desired but feared me, for I never gave them any encouragement, seeing as yet none among them whom I deemed worthy of such love as I could give. The majority resembled carefully trained baboons, respectably clothed and artistically shaven, but nevertheless, all with the spasmodic grin, the leering eyes, the uncouth gestures of the hairy woodland monster. When I was just 18, I came out in earnest. That is, I was presented at court with all the foolish and farcical pomp practiced upon such occasions. I was told before going that it was a great and necessary thing to be presented, that it was quite a guarantee of position and, above all, reputation. The Queen received none whose conduct was not rigidly correct and virtuous. What humbug it all was! I laughed then, and I can smile now to think of it. Why, the very woman who presented me had 2 illegitimate sons unknown to her lawful husband, and she was not the only playful sinner in the court's comedy. Some women were there that day whom, since even I would not receive, so openly infamous are their lives and characters, yet they make their demure curtsies before the throne at stated times and assume to be the very patrons of virtue and austerity. And now and then it chances in case of an exceedingly beautiful woman of whom all the others are jealous, that for her little slips she is selected as an example and excluded from court, while her plainer sisters, though sinning 70 times 7 against the laws of decency and morality, are still received. But otherwise, there is very little real exercised as the character and prestige of the women whom the queen receives. If any one of them is refused, it is certain she adds to her social enmities the greater crime of being beautiful. Otherwise, there would be no one to whisper away her reputation. I was what is called a success on my presentation day. That is, I was stared at and openly flattered by certain members of my sex who were too old and too ugly to be jealous, and treated with insolent contempt by those who were young enough to be my rivals. There was a great crush to get into the throne room, and some of the ladies used rather strong language. One duchess, just in front of me, said to her companion, "Do as I do, kick out. Bruise their shins for them, as hard as you can. We shall get on faster then." This choice remark was accompanied by a grin of a fishwife, and the stare of a drab, yet it was a great lady who spoke, not that transatlantic connection. Her observation, however, was only one out of many similar speeches which I heard on all sides of me during the distinguished mêlée. A thoroughly ill-mannered crush, which struck me as surprisingly vulgar and totally unfitting the dignity of the sovereign's court. When I curtsied before the throne at last, and saw the majesty of the empire represented by a kindly-faced old lady, looking very tired and bored, whose hand was as cold as ice when I kissed it, I was conscious of an intense feeling of pity for her in her high estate. Who would be a monarch to be doomed to perpetual receiving of company of fools? I got through my duties quickly and returned home more or less wearied out and disgusted with the whole ceremony. And next day I found that my debut had given me the position of a leading beauty, or in other words, that I was now formally put up for sale. That is really what is meant by being presented and coming out. These are fancy terms as one's parental auctioneer. My life was now passed in dressing, having my photograph taken, giving sittings to aspiring fashionable painters, and being inspected by men with a view to matrimony. It was distinctly understood in society that I was not to be sold under a certain figure per annum, and the price was too high for most would-be purchasers. How sick I grew of my constant exhibition in the marriage market! What contempt and hatred was fostered in me for the mean and pitiable hypocrisies of my set! I was not long in discovering that money was the chief motive power of all the social success, that the proudest and highest personages in the world could be easily gathered together under one roof of any vulgar plebeian who happened to have enough cash to feed and entertain them. As an example of this, I remember a woman, ugly, passé, and squint-eyed, who during her father's life was only allowed about half a crown a week as pocket money up to her 40th year, and who, when that her father died, leaving her in possession of half of his fortune, the other half going to his illegitimate children, of whom she had never heard, he, having always posed as a patron of immaculate virtue, suddenly blossomed out as a leader of fashion and succeeded, through cautious scheming and ungrudging toadyism, in assembling some of the highest people in the land under her roof. Ugly and passé though she was, and verging towards 50, with neither grace, wit, nor intelligence, through the power of her cash alone, she invited royal dukes and the titles generally to her dinners and dances. And it is so to their shame that they actually accepted her invitations. Such voluntary degradations on the part of really well-connected people I have never been able to understand. It is not as they were actually in want of food or amusement, for they have a sure fit of both for every season. And it seems to me that they ought to show a better example than to flock in crowds to the entertainments of a mere uninteresting and ugly nobody, just because she happens to have money. I never entered her house myself, though she had the audacity to invite me. I learned, moreover, that she had promised a friend of mine 100 guineas if she could persuade me to make one appearance in her rooms. For my renown as beauty, combined with my pride and exclusiveness, would have given her parties prestige greater even than royalty could bestow. She knew that she knew that, and I knew that, and knowing it, never condescended to so much as notice by her bow. But though I took a certain satisfaction in thus revenging myself on the atrocious vulgarity of the Pevermans and social interlopers, I grew intensely weary of the monotony and emptiness of what fashionable folks call amusement, and presently, falling ill of nervous fever, I was sent down to the seaside for a few weeks. Change of air with a young cousin of mine, a girl I rather liked, because she was so different to myself. Her name was Ava Maitland. She was but 16 and extremely delicate, poor little soul. She died 2 months before my marriage. She and I and a maid to attend us went down to Cromer, and one day, sitting on the cliffs together, she asked me timidly if I knew an author named Mavis Clare. I told her no, whereupon she handed me a book called The Wings of Psyche. Do read it, she said earnestly. It will make you feel so happy. I laughed. The idea of a modern author writing anything to make one feel happy seemed to me quite ludicrous, the aim of most of them being to awaken a disgust of life and a hatred of one's fellow creatures. However, to please Ava, I read The Wings of Psyche, and if it did not make me actually happy, it moved me to a greater wonder and deep reverence for a woman writer of such a book. I found out all about her, that she was young, pretty, of noble character and unblemished reputation, and that her only enemies were the press critics. This last point was so much in her favor with me that I at once bought everything she had ever written, and her works became, as it were, my haven of rest. Her theories of life are strange, poetic, ideal, and beautiful, though I have not been able to accept them or work them out in my own case. I have always felt soothed and comforted for a while in the very act of wishing they were true. And the woman is like her books, strange, poetic, ideal, and beautiful. How odd is it to think that she is within 10 minutes' walk of me now? I could send for her if I liked and tell her all, but she would prevent me carrying out my resolve. She would cling to me, woman-like, and kiss me and hold my hands and say, "No, Sybil, no. You are not yourself. You must come to me and rest." An odd fancy has seized me. I would open my window and call her very gently. She might be in the garden, coming here to see me, and if she hears and answers, who knows? Why, perhaps my ideas may change, and fate itself may take a different course. Well, I have called her. I have sent her name, Mavis, softly out on the sunshine and still air 3 times, and only little brown namesake of hers, a thrush, swinging on a branch of fir, answered me with a low autumnal piping. Mavis, she will not come today. God will not make her his messenger. She cannot guess, she does not know this tragedy of my heart, greater and more poignant than all of the tragedies of fiction. If she did know me, as I am, I wonder what she would think of me. Let me go back to the time when love came to me, love, ardent, passionate, and eternal. Ah, what wild joy thrilled through me! What mad ecstasy fired my blood! What delirious dreams possessed my brain! I saw Lucio, and it seemed as if the splendid eyes of some great angel had flashed a glory in my soul. With him came his friend, the foil to his beauty, the arrogant, self-satisfied fool of a millionaire, Geoffrey Tempest. He who bought me, and who by virtue of his purchase is entitled by law to call himself my husband. Here I paused in my reading and looked up. The dead woman's eyes appeared to now regard me as steadily as herself in the opposite mirror. The head was a little more dropped forward and on the breast, and the whole face very nearly resembled that of the late Countess of Elton, when the last shock of paralysis had rendered her hideous disfigurement complete. "To think I loved that," I said aloud, pointing at the corpse's ghastly reflection. Fool that I was indeed, as great a fool as men who are the barter their lives for the possessions of a woman's mere body. Why, if there were any life after death, if such a creature had a soul that at all resembled this poisoned clay, the very devils might turn away aghast from such loathly comrade. The candles flickered, and the dead face seemed to smile. A clock chimed in the adjoining room, but I did not count the hour. I merely arranged the manuscript pages. I held more methodically and read on with renewed attention. Chapter 36. From the moment I saw Lucio Jimenez, went on Sybil's dying speech, I abandoned myself to love and the desire of love. I had heard of him before from my father, who had, as I learned to my shame, been indebted to him for monetary assistance. On the very night we met, my father told me quite plainly that now was my chance to get settled in life. Marry Jimenez or Tempest, whichever you can most easily catch, he said. The prince is fabulously wealthy, but he keeps up mystery about himself, and no one knows where he actually comes from. Besides which, he dislikes women. Now, Tempest has 5 millions, and seems an easy-going fool. I should say you had better go for Tempest. I made no answer, and gave no promise either way. I soon found out, however, that Lucio did not intend to marry, and I concluded that he preferred to be the lover of many women instead of the husband of one. I did not love him any the less for this. I only resolved that I would at least be one of those who were happy enough to share his passion. I married the man Tempest, feeling that, like many women I knew, I should, when safely wedded, have greater liberty of action. I was aware that most modern men prefer an amour with a married woman to any other kind of liaison, and I thought Lucio would have readily yielded to the plan I had preconceived, but I was mistaken. And out of this mistake comes all of my perplexity, pain, and bewilderment. I cannot understand why my love, beloved beyond all word and thought, should scorn me and repulse me with such bitter loathing. It is such a common thing nowadays for a married woman to have her own lover apart from her husband, de convenance. The writers of books advise it. I have seen the custom not only excused but advocated over and over again in long and scientific articles that are openly published in leading magazines. Why then should I be blamed for my desires considered criminal? As long as no public scandal is made, what harm is done? I cannot see it. It is not that there were a God to care. The scientists say there is no God. I was very startled just now. I thought I heard Lucio's voice calling me. I've walked the rooms looking everywhere, and I opened my door to listen, but there is no one. I am alone. I have told the servant not to disturb me till I ring. I shall never ring. Now I come to think of it, it is singular that I have never known who Lucio really is. A prince, he says, and that I can well believe, though truly princes nowadays are so plebeian and common in looks and bearing that he seems too great to belong to shabby a fraternity. From what kingdom does he come? To what nation does he belong? These are questions which he never answers, save equivocally. I pause here and look at myself in the mirror. How beautiful I am! I note with admiration the deep and dewy lustre of my eyes and their dark, silky fringes. I see the delicate coloring of my cheeks and lips, the dear, rounded chin, with its pretty dimple, the pure lines of my slim throat, the snowy neck, glistening wealth of my long hair. All this was given to me for the attraction and luring of men, but my love, whom I love with all of this living, breathing, exquisite being of mine, can see no beauty in me, and rejects me with such scorn as pierces my very soul. I have knelt to him, I have prayed to him, I have worshipped him in vain. Hence it comes that I must die. Only one thing he said that had the sound of hope, though the utterance was fierce and his looks were cruel. Patience, he whispered. We shall meet ere long. What did he mean? What possible meeting can there be now, when death must close the gate of life, and even love would come too late? I have unlocked my jewel case and taken from it the deadly thing secreted there, a poison that was entrusted to me by one of the physicians who lately attended my mother. Keep this under lock and key, he said, and be sure that it is used only for external purposes. There is sufficient in this flask to kill 10 men if swallowed by mistake. I look at it in wonderingly. It is colorless, and there is not enough to fill a teaspoon, yet it will bring down upon me an eternal darkness, and close up ever the marvelous scene of the universe. So little to do so much. I have fastened Lucio's wedding gift around my waist, the beautiful snake of jewels that clings to me as though it were charged with an embrace from him. Ah, would I could cheat myself into so pleasing a fancy. I'm trembling, but not with cold or fear. It is simply an excitation of the nerves, an instinctive recoil of flesh and blood at the near prospect of death. How brilliantly the sun shines through my window. Its callous golden stare has watched so many tortured creatures die, without so much as a cloud to dim its radiance by way of the suggestion of pity. If there were a God, I fancy he would be like the sun, glorious, changeless, unapproachable, beautiful, but pitiless. Out of all the various types of human beings, I think I hate the class called poets the most. I used to love them and believe in them, but I know them now to be mere weavers of lies, builders of cloud castles in which no throbbing life can breathe, no weary heart find rest. Love is their chief motive. They either idolize or degrade it. And of the love we women long for, most they have no conception. They can only sing of brute passion or ethical impossibilities, of the mutual great sympathy, of the ungrudging patient tenderness that should make love lovely. They have no sweet things to say between their strained aestheticism and unbridled sensualism. My spirit has been stretched on the rack and broken on the wheel. I should think many a wretched woman wrecked among love's disillusions must curse them as I do. I am ready now, I think. There is nothing more to say. I offer no excuses for myself. I am as I was made, a proud and rebellious woman, self-willed and sensual, seeing no fault in free love, and no crime in conjugal infidelity. And if I am vicious, I can honestly declare that my vices have been encouraged and fostered in me by the most literary teachers of my time. I married, as most women of my set marry, merely for money. I loved, as most women of my set love, for mere bodily attraction. I die, as most women of my set will die, either naturally or self-slain in utter atheism, rejoicing that there is no God and no hereafter. I had the poison in my hand a moment ago, ready to take, when I suddenly felt someone approaching me stealthily from behind, and glancing up quickly in the mirror, I saw my mother. Her face, hideous and ghastly as it had been part of her last illness, was reflected in the glass, peering over my shoulder. I sprang up and confronted her. She was gone. And now I am shivering with cold, and I feel chill dampness on my forehead. Mechanically, I have soaked the handkerchief with perfume from one of the silver bottles on the dressing table and have pressed it across my temples to help me recover from this sick, swooning sensation. To recover. How foolish of me, seeing as I am about to die. I do not believe in ghosts, yet I could have sworn my mother was actually present just now. Of course, it was an optical delusion of my own feverish brain. The strong scent of my handkerchief reminds me of Paris. I can see the shop where I bought this particular parfum, and the well-dressed doll of a man who served me, with this little waxed moustache and his indefinable French manner of conveying a speechless personal compliment while making out a bill. Laughing at this recollection, I see my face radiate in the glass. My eyes flash into vivid luster, and the dimples near my lips come and go, giving my expression an enchanting sweetness. Yet in a few hours this loveliness will be destroyed, and in a few days the worms will twine where the smile is now. An idea has come upon me that perhaps I ought to say a prayer. It would be hypocritical, but conventional, to die fashionably, one ought to concede a few words to the church, and yet to kneel down with clasped hands and tell an inactive, unsympathetic, selfish, paid community called a church that I am going to kill myself for the sake of love and love's despair, and that therefore I humbly implore its forgiveness for the act, seems absurd. As absurd as to tell the same thing to a non existent deity. I suppose the scientists do not think what strange predicament their advanced theories put the human mind in at the hour of death. They forget that on the brink of the grave, thoughts come that will not be gainsaid, and that cannot be appeased by a learned thesis. However, I will not pray. It would seem to myself cowardly that I, who have never said my prayers since I was a child, should run over them now in a foolish, babbling attempt to satisfy the powers invisible. I could not, out of sheer association, appeal to Mr. Swinburne's crucified carrion. Besides, I do not believe in the powers invisible at all. I feel that once outside this life, the rest, as Hamlet said, is silence. I have been staring dreamily and in sort of a stupefaction at the little poison flask in my hand. It is quite empty now. I have swallowed every drop of liquid it contained. I took it quickly and determinedly, as one takes nauseous medicine without allowing myself another moment of time for thought or hesitation. It tasted acidic and burning on my tongue, but at present I'm not conscious of any strange or painful result. I shall watch my face in the mirror and trace the oncoming death. This will be at any rate a new sensation, not without interest. My mother is here with me in this room. She is moving about restlessly, making wild gestures with her hands and trying to speak. She looks as she did when she was dying, only more alive, more sentient. I have followed her up and down, but am unable to touch her. She eludes my grasp. I have called to her, "Mother, mother," but no sound issues from her white lips. Her face is so appalling that I was seized with a convulsion of terror for a moment ago and fell on my knees before her, imploring her to leave me. And then she paused in her gliding to and fro and smiled. What a hideous smile it was! I think I lost consciousness, for I found myself lying on the ground, a sharp and terrible pain running through me, and made me spring to my feet, and I bit my lips till they bled, lest I should scream aloud with the agony I suffered, and so alarm the house. When the paroxysm passed, I saw my mother standing quite near to me, dumbly watching me with strange expression of wonder and remorse. I tottered past her and back to this chair where I now sit. I am calmer now, and I am able to realize that she is only the phantom of my own brain, that I fancy she is here while knowing she is dead. Torture indescribable has made me a writhing, moaning, helpless creature for the past few minutes. Truly that drug was deadly. Oh, the pain is horrible. Horrible. It has left me quivering in every limb and palpitating in every nerve. Look at my face in the glass. I see that it is already altered. It is drawn and livid. All the fresh rose tint of my lips is gone. My eyes protruded unnaturally. There are dull blue marks at the corners of my mouth and in the hollows of my temples, and I observe a curious quick pulsation in the veins of my throat. Be my torment what it will, now there is no remedy, and I am resolved to sit here and study my own features to the end. The reaper, whose name is Death, must surely be near, ready to gather my long hair in the skeleton hand like a sheaf of ripe corn. My poor beautiful hair! I have loved its glistening ripples and brushed it and twined it around my fingers, and how soon it will lie like a dank weed in the mold. Oh, a devouring fire is in my brain and body. I am burning with my heat and parched with thirst. I have drunk deep draughts of cold water, but it has not relieved me. The sun glares in upon me like open furnace. I try to rise and close the blind against it, but I find no force to stand upright. The strong radiance blinds me. The silver toilet boxes on my table glitter like so many points of swords. It is by powerful effort or I will of will that I am able to continue writing. My head is swimming round, and there is a choking sensation in my throat. A moment since I thought I was dying, torn asunder as it were by the most torturing pangs. I could have screamed for help, and would have done so had a voice been left me, but I cannot speak above a whisper. I mutter my own name to myself, Sybil, Sybil, and can scarcely hear it. My mother stands beside me, apparently waiting. A little while ago I thought I heard her say, "Come, Sybil, come to your chosen lover." Now I am conscious of great silence everywhere. A numbness has fallen upon me, and a delicious respite from pain. But I see my face in the glass, and I know it's the face of the dead. It will soon be all over. A few more uneasy breathings, and I shall be at rest. I am glad, for the world and I were never good friends. I am sure that if I could know before we were born what life really is, we would never take the trouble to live. A horrible fear has beset me. What if death were now what the scientists deem it? Suppose it were another form of life. Can it be that I am losing reason and courage together? Or what is this terrible misgiving that is taking possession of me? I began to falter. A strange sense of horror is creeping over me. I have no more physical pain, but something worse than pain oppresses me. A feeling that I cannot define. I am dying. Dying, I repeat this to myself for comfort. In a little while I shall be deaf and blind and unconscious. Why then is the silence around me now broken through by sound? I listen, and I hear distinctly the clamor of wild voices mingled with sullen jar and roll of distant thunder. My mother stands closer to me. She is stretching out her hand to touch mine. Oh God, oh God, let me write. Write, I can. Let me yet hold fast the thread which fastens me to earth. Give me time before I drift out, lost in yonder blackness and flame. Let me write for others the awful truth as I see it. There is no death, none. I cannot die. I am passing out of my body. I am being wrenched away from it inch by inch, inexplicable mystic torture, but I am not dying. I am being carried toward it into a new life, vague and vast. I see a new world, full of dark forms, half shaped yet shapeless. They float towards me, beckoning me. I am actively conscious. I hear, I think, I know. Death is a mere human dream, a comforting fancy. It has no real existence. There is nothing in the universe but life. Oh, hideous misery! I cannot die. In my mortal body I can scarcely breathe. The pen I try to hold writes itself rather than through my shaking hand. But these pangs are the throes of birth, not death. I hold back with all the force of my soul. I strive not to plunge into that black abyss. I see before me, but my mother drags me with her. I cannot shake her off. I hear her voice now. She speaks distinctly and laughs as though she wept. "Come, Sybil, soul of the child I bore, come and meet your lover, come and see upon whom you fixed your faith. Soul of the woman I trained, return to that from whence you came." Still I hold back, nude and trembling. I stare into the dark void, and now there are wings about me, wings of fiery scarlet. They fill the space. They unfold me. They propel me. They rush me past, whirling around me, stinging me with flying arrows and showers of hail. Let me write on with this dead fleshly hand. One moment more time, dread God, one moment more to write the truth, the terrible truth of death, whose darkest secret life is unknown to men. I live. A new, strong, impetuous vitality possesses me, though my mortal body is nearly dead. Faint gasps and weak shudderings affect it still, and I, outside it, and no longer of it, propel its perishing hand to write these final words. I live. To my despair and terror, to my remorse and agony, I live. Oh, the unspeakable misery of this new life. And worst of all, God whom I doubted, God whom I was taught to deny. This wronged, blasphemed, and outraged God exists, and I could have found him had I chosen. This knowledge is forced upon me as I am torn from hence. It is shouted at me by 1,000 wailing voices. Too late, too late. The scarlet wings beat me downward. These strange, half-shapeless forms close round and drive me onward to further darkness amid wind and fire. Serve me, dead hand, once more ere I depart. My tortured spirit must seize and compel you to write down this thing unnameable that earthly eyes may read and earthly souls take timely warning. I know at last whom I have loved, whom I have chosen, whom I have worshipped. O God, have mercy. I know who claims my worship now and drags me into yonder rolling world of flame. His name is... Here the manuscript ended, incomplete and broken off abruptly, and there was a blot in the last sentence, as though the pen had been violently wrenched from the dying fingers and hastily flung down. The clock in the west room again chimed the hour. I rose stiffly from my chair, trembling. My self-possession was giving way, and I began to feel at last unnerved. I looked askance at my dead wife, she who with superhuman dying effort had declared herself to be yet alive, who in some imaginable strange way had seemingly written after death in a frantic desire to make some appalling declaration which nevertheless remained undeclared. The rigid figure of the corpse had now real terrors for me. I dared not touch it. I scarcely dared to look at it. In some dim, inscrutable fashion, I felt as if scarlet wings environed it, beating me down, yet pressing me on, me too, in my turn, with the manuscript gathered close in my hand. I bent nervously forward to blow out the wax candles on the toilet table. I saw on the floor the handkerchief odorous with French perfume the dead woman had written of. I picked it up and placed it near where she sat, grinning hideously at her own mirrored ghastliness. The flash of the jeweled serpent round her waist caught my eye anew, as did this, and I started for a moment, as its green glitter dumbly fascinated then, moving stealthily with a cold sweat pouring down my back, and every pulse in me rendered feeble by sheer horror. I turned to leave the room as I reached the portiere and lifted it, and some instinct made me look back at the dread picture of the leading society beauty, sitting stark and livid pale before her own stark and livid pale image in the glass. What a fashion plate she would make now, I thought, for a frivolous and hypocritical lady's paper. You say you are not dead, Sybil, I muttered aloud. Not dead, but living. Then if you are alive, where are you, Sybil? Where are you? The heavy silence seemed fraught with fearful meaning. The light of the electric lamps on the corpse and on the shimmering silk garment wrapped around it appeared unearthly, and the perfume in the room had the grave-like earthly smell. A panic seized me, and dragging frantically at the portiere till all its velvet folds were drawn thickly together, I made haste to shut out from my sight the horrible figure of the woman whose bodily fairness I had loved in the customary way of sensual men, and left her without so much as pardoning or pitying kiss of farewell on the cold brow, for after all I had made myself to think of, and she was dead. It's about to chime the hour, and I think we still have one more time of reading, because we are at page 411, and we go till page 471. So 71 more pages to go. I don't think we'll be able to complete that in the next 5 minutes, so we will come back to that next week. I hope that you are enjoying this book. We're almost there. We're getting down to the end now. So if you are enjoying Storytime, if this channel gives you pleasure, if it gives you joy, and only if you can afford it, if it is not an imposition, I would ask that you would join me on Patreon under patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. You can find me on PayPal at rlillard6@gmail.com, at Venmo, Richard-Lale Lillard. And that's, every donation helps me to continue giving great things, great entertainment, great story time. Here comes the clock at the hour as it said so in the book. And I so appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for all of the likes, the comments, the shares. If you cannot donate, you're still welcome. I still love you. I'm still proud of you. I'm still glad to have you. Thank you for all of your listening. Thank you for all of your love. And follow me on Instagram. Follow for new pictures, new paintings that are coming out in the tarot. If you'd like to contact me for a psychic reading, you can find me at thegentlemanpsychic.com. With that, my loves, one more week ahead into the future, but it sounds like we may have more seasonal things coming in the later chapters. Good night, my loves. Have a beautiful evening. Until next time. Thank you much.